The studio lights burned bright, casting long shadows across the debate stage where Pam Bondi stood with a microphone clenched in her hand like a weapon. She wore that familiar smirk, the one she used on TV when she believed she had the upper hand. But tonight, as she turned toward Ibrahim Traoré, she didn't realize she was walking into a storm she couldn't control. The audience leaned forward, sensing tension before she even opened her mouth. Pam stepped closer, heels clicking sharply. "You talk big for a man whose country still struggles," she snapped, her voice dripping with condescension. "Maybe start fixing your own house before criticizing ours." A few people gasped. Others chuckled nervously. But Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He simply studied her, calm, focused, unshaken, like a soldier who had weathered far worse than cheap insults in a heated room. Pam mistook his silence for weakness. She pushed harder. "Tell me, Traoré, what gives you the right to lecture America on justice, order, or anything at all?" The cameras zoomed in. Millions were watching. Pam thought she had cornered him. But Traoré finally moved, slowly, deliberately. He lifted his head, his expression steady and unreadable, and spoke with the precision of a blade. "The right you fear," he said. His voice was low, but it carried through the hall like thunder rolling across a desert. Pam blinked, confused. The audience went silent. The energy shifted. Traoré continued, stepping forward as the spotlight followed him. "You try to shame me because you cannot silence me. You hide behind speeches, studios, and scripts, but I stand here with truth. And truth doesn't tremble." Pam swallowed hard, suddenly unsure of her footing. She had thrown the first punch. But Traoré had landed the first blow. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in something far more dangerous to her, respect. Traoré hadn't even begun, yet Pam realized she was already losing control of the room. The room stayed tense long after Traoré finished speaking, and Pam Bondi tried to recover her footing. Her attempt to publicly shame him had backfired so violently that even the cameras seemed to shift toward him, not her. But she wasn't done, her pride wouldn't allow it. She lifted her chin, forced a smile, and leaned into the microphone as if she still controlled the room. "Let me be perfectly clear," she said, voice crisp, "you stand here pretending to expose corruption, yet your own country struggles with order. Who are you to lecture anyone?" The crowd murmured, some nodding, others stiffening. Traoré didn't move. He simply let her talk, his posture calm, the posture of a man who had seen bullets, storms, coups, things far more terrifying than an American official searching for applause. Bondi continued, "You parade around like some hero. But leadership is responsibility, and responsibility comes from discipline, rules, and—" Traoré lifted his hand slightly. Not to silence her, but as if he were brushing away dust. That subtle movement alone made half the audience turn toward him again. "Pam," he said, voice steady, almost gentle, "before you talk about discipline, ask your country why children sit in cages. Before you speak of rules, ask why you bend them when it suits you. Before you accuse me of pretending, ask why you fear the truth spoken by a soldier." Her smile evaporated. "And one more thing," Traoré added, leaning forward, "I do not stand here to expose corruption. I stand here because your world built its power by hiding ours. And today, you can't hide anymore." The murmurs grew louder, heavier. People turned toward Bondi to see her reaction. She had none. Her jaw tightened, her hands trembled just enough for the cameras to catch it. She wanted to fire back, but every word she rehearsed collapsed under the weight of his calm. Traoré stepped closer to the mic. "You tried to shame me," he said, "but shame belongs to those who silence the weak, not to those who defend them." The room erupted, not with applause, but with something more dangerous, silence filled with agreement. Pam Bondi stood stiff as cameras flashed, trying to reclaim control of a moment she had already lost. Her voice cracked with forced authority as she said, "General Traoré, people like you hide behind big words and bigger accusations. You're trying to shame America, but all you're doing is embarrassing yourself." She expected applause. She expected nods. Instead, she got silence, heavy, cold, waiting for Traoré. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean forward. He simply looked at her, as though peeling away every layer she had tried so desperately to hide behind. Shame, he said slowly. If I wanted to shame anyone, all I'd have to do is hold up a mirror. The crowd stirred. Pam's smile faltered. He continued, his tone almost too calm. You lecture Africa about order. You lecture us about justice. But tell me, who built their wealth on stolen hands? Who still cages children at borders? Who starts wars they never fight in? Pam's jaw tightened, but Traoré wasn't done. You call it leadership, he said. We call it hypocrisy. She tried to interject, that's not. But Traoré raised a hand, and somehow the room obeyed him instead of her. You walked in thinking you could expose me, he said. But the world already sees you. Every word you've spoken today opened the curtain a little wider. Cameras zoomed in. Pam realized she was frozen, not by fear of Traoré, but by fear of what millions would think when they watched the replay. Traoré leaned back, unbothered. You tried to shame me, he said softly. But all you did was reveal yourself. The audience erupted, not in chaos, but in revelation. Pam Bondi had come to corner Traoré. Instead, she ended up standing in the biggest spotlight of her life, with nowhere left to hide. The room fell into a strange, uneasy silence as Pam Bondi tried to rebuild her confidence. Cameras zoomed in, reporters leaned forward, and every politician in the hall pretended to check their notes, just to avoid meeting Traoré's eyes. Everyone felt it. The shift. The power moving across the room like a storm they couldn't stop. Pam forced a smile, the kind politicians wear when they know they've already lost but refuse to admit it. President Traoré, she said, voice trembling beneath the polished exterior, you seem to misunderstand how the world works. Nations succeed by following rules. Our rules. Traoré tilted his head, amused. Your rules, he repeated softly, are the reason half the world is on fire. Pam stiffened. Excuse me? Traoré stepped closer, not threatening, but commanding, the way a soldier walks toward a battlefield he has no intention of losing. You lecture Africa about order, he said, while your prisons are full, your streets burn with protests, your police kill unarmed civilians, and your own citizens can't afford healthcare. And you dare speak to me about rules? A ripple moved through the crowd. A couple of diplomats exchanged glances, pretending not to smirk. A senator coughed to hide a laugh. Even Pam's own assistant looked away. Pam swallowed. We enforce stability. No, Traoré replied, you enforce silence. On others. Never on yourselves. Her jaw clenched. You're twisting my words. Your words don't matter, Traoré said. Your actions do. You talk about law and order, while destabilizing entire regions. You talk about democracy, while funding coups. You talk about human rights, while turning away refugees you helped displace. Pam took one step back. Traoré didn't move. You tried to shame me for defending my people, he continued. But today, the world sees the truth. You don't fear chaos. You fear accountability. The room inhaled sharply, everyone feeling the blow land like a hammer. Pam's voice cracked. You're making dangerous accusations. Traoré leaned in just enough for the microphones to catch every word. Not accusations. Records. History. Receipts. And I can show them all. Gasps shot across the room. Pam froze. Exposed, cornered, and out of lines to hide behind. Traoré straightened his posture, looking directly into the cameras. Order doesn't come from intimidation, he said. It comes from justice. Something your world should try, at least once. The crowd erupted, not with applause, but with awe. The kind that follows when someone says the truth everyone else was too scared to speak aloud. Pam Bondi didn't expect the room to turn on her. She thought her voice, sharpened by years of TV outrage and courtroom theatrics, would be enough to intimidate Traoré. But this time, her accusations hit a wall made of quiet, unshakable resolve. When she leaned forward and snapped, "You hide behind rhetoric," she expected applause. Instead, the room sank into an uncomfortable silence, as if everyone sensed she had stepped somewhere she shouldn't have. Traoré didn't move. He didn't blink. His stillness made her more nervous than any raised voice could. Rhetoric, he repeated softly, almost amused. I speak reality. You're the one performing. The people watching felt the shift instantly, her authority slipping, his rising without effort. Pam doubled down, desperation creeping into her tone. You manipulate people with emotion, she insisted, her voice trembling just enough to betray her. But Traoré simply tilted his head, studying her like a scientist observing a failing experiment. Emotion, he said. No. Truth carries its own weight. It's your lies that need a performance. Her jaw tightened. She could feel her composure cracking, and Traoré saw it. Every time someone challenges your world, he continued, you react with fear. And that fear makes you lash out. Not at me, at the people you claim to protect. The room shifted again. Eyes moving from her to him, and back to her. The balance was gone. Traoré wasn't shouting, wasn't grandstanding, he was dismantling her with a calm precision that made her arguments look theatrical and small. Pam tried one last time to regain ground. I fight for order, she declared. I fight for justice. Traoré leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper, but powerful enough to silence the entire hall. Order built on oppression is not justice. And justice built on fear is not justice at all. Everyone felt the blow. Pam's shoulders dropped. Her confidence drained. And Traoré, without raising his voice or making a scene, had stripped away the image she relied on. Not with anger. Not with volume. But with undeniable truth. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His composure alone made the room tilt toward him, while Pam Bondi, still flushed with outrage, tried to regain the spotlight she had already lost. Cameras zoomed in, sensing the shift, one leader growing larger without moving at all, the other shrinking despite all the noise she made. Bondi pointed again, this time with a trembling hesitation. You think exposing me changes anything? She snapped. America decides the narrative, not you. Traoré simply stepped forward, letting the silence work for him before he spoke. If America decides the narrative, he said calmly, why are your people watching mine? The room erupted, not with noise, but with shock. Reporters glanced at each other. Bondi stiffened. Traoré continued, because truth doesn't need a network. It travels faster than lies. Bondi swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. You think you're some kind of hero? She demanded. Traoré shook his head. No. Heroes die for applause. I speak for those you pretend not to see. He lifted a folder from the table, images, statistics, reports, all publicly available but intentionally buried. He dropped it in front of Bondi. This, he said, is what you hid. And this, he tapped the cameras, the crowd, the millions watching live, is who you hid it from. Gasps filled the room. Bondi looked down at the exposed documents, then up at the man who had dismantled her entire performance in less than a minute. You planned this, she muttered. Traoré smiled faintly. No. You handed it to me. I just held up the mirror. Bondi opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Traoré's expression didn't change, his power came from not needing to humiliate her further, she was doing that herself. When you speak of law and order, he said softly, start by ordering your own conscience. The room went still. Even Bondi's supporters stayed silent, sensing that she had walked into a fight she wasn't equipped to win. Traoré wasn't shouting. He wasn't threatening. He was simply telling the truth, with the precision of a scalpel. The room fell into a charged silence the moment Pam Bondi tried to regain control. Her voice, sharp and trembling, sliced through the tension. You think exposing me changes anything? I still speak for America. But even she knew her confidence was cracking. The cameras were rolling, millions were watching, and Traoré's calm composure had already shifted the momentum. Traoré didn't flinch. He leaned forward, not with aggression, but with the steady certainty of a man who had survived dictators, sanctions, coups, and foreign agendas. "No," he said, voice low but resonant. "You speak for a system, not for its people. And that is why you're losing." Pam's jaw tightened. "You're overstepping." Traoré smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't comfort. One that exposes truth. "Overstepping? Your nation steps into countries uninvited. Lectures continents it barely understands. Calls theft aid. Calls occupation stability. And you want to talk about overstepping?" She tried interrupting, desperate to find footing, but Traoré's words drowned her attempts like a rising tide. "You stand here accusing Africa of chaos," he continued, "but your own cities burn. Your own leaders fight on live television. Your own democracy shakes every election cycle." A murmur spread across the room. Even the American reporters lowered their cameras slightly, conflicted between loyalty and the undeniable truth echoing in the air. Pam's eyes flickered, not with anger this time, but fear. The fear of losing the narrative she thought she controlled. "Pam," Traoré said finally, "you tried to shame me with lies. I simply answered you with your own reflection." The hall fell silent as every camera turned toward Pam Bondi, her once confident smile now twitching at the corners. She had thrown every insult, every accusation, every rehearsed attack at Traoré, and nothing had shaken him. Instead, her own voice had started to crack, her posture tightening, her breath unsteady. And the world saw it. Traoré, calm as a general watching a storm he already knew he could command, stepped forward with a presence so heavy that even the guards subtly straightened. "Is this all?" he asked softly, but the softness cut deeper than any shout. It was the kind of question that peeled a person open, not with anger but with truth. Pam blinked rapidly, like someone trying to exit a nightmare they accidentally created. You twist everything," she muttered. But her words had lost weight. They didn't land. They didn't intimidate. They floated empty between them. Traoré didn't laugh. He didn't smirk. He simply looked at her. As if evaluating not her status, not her office, but her soul. "You tried to shame me," he said, voice low, "but all you did was reveal yourself. That fear behind your eyes? That's the truth you hide from your people." A murmur rippled through the hall. Even reporters lowered their phones for a moment, struck by the rawness in the air. Pam tried to regain control of the narrative, straightening her shoulders, lifting her chin. "Don't lecture me about fear," she snapped. But her voice betrayed a tremor she couldn't hide. Traoré kept walking, closing the distance between them until every lens zoomed in, every spectator held their breath. "If you were unshaken," he said, "your voice wouldn't tremble. Your hands wouldn't tighten. And you wouldn't hide behind the world's biggest military to speak to one man." Pam's jaw clenched. She hated that he noticed. She hated even more that he was right. For the first time in the exchange, she dropped her eyes. Not intentionally, not strategically, but because holding his gaze was simply too heavy. Traoré leaned in slightly, not threatening, not aggressive, simply undeniable. "Strength isn't in how loudly you accuse," he whispered. "It's in how calmly you stand." And the room knew. Pam Bondi hadn't just lost the argument. She had lost the image she tried to project. The room was no longer loud, Pam Bondi's voice had evaporated, replaced by a silence that felt like a trembling wire ready to snap. Cameras zoomed in, journalists leaned so far forward they looked like they might fall from their seats, and yet Traoré stood as if he were carved from something older and harder than stone. Bondi tried to recover, gathering whatever remained of her political composure, but every attempt only made her look smaller next to the man who refused to bend. "Don't twist my words," she snapped, her tone sharp but hollow. "You're deflecting. You're hiding behind theatrics because you know you can't defend your failures." Traoré didn't even blink. If you believe that, he said calmly, you wouldn't be shaking every time I look at you. Her lips parted, just barely, but nothing came out. The crowd reacted instantly. Some gasped, others tried to stifle their laughter, and a few simply stared, unsure whether they were witnessing politics or the unraveling of a reputation in real time. Bondi turned her head, hoping for backup from the American officials standing behind her, but not one of them moved. Not one dared step forward. They didn't want to inherit the blow she had just taken. Traoré stepped closer, not aggressively, not threateningly, but with the controlled presence of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he represented. You accuse us, he said, voice steady, because you need someone to blame for the cracks in your own system. But Africa isn't your shield. And I'm not here to be your stage prop. The words hit harder than any volume Bondi could have shouted. The cameras captured every millisecond of her faltering expression. You came here to shame me, Traoré added, yet the only thing exposed today is your fear. A ripple moved through the hall, an energy that felt like a historic shift, a moment that would linger on every news cycle for weeks. Bondi clenched her fists, searching for a response, a comeback, anything, but Traoré's unwavering stare swallowed every last fragment of her confidence. And for the first time in a long time, she realized, she was not the one controlling the room. The room had become a furnace of tension, every camera locked in, every aide frozen, every whisper strangled in the air. Pam Bondi stood stiff, her shoulders trembling with a mixture of anger and humiliation she could no longer hide. She had tried everything, mockery, authority, threats, even the classic American political intimidation. But none of it worked. Not against him. Not today. Not ever. Traoré, calm as a man watching the sun rise over Ouagadougou, took one step forward. Just one, yet every figure in the room reacted as if a tectonic plate had shifted under their feet. Even Pam's security straightened unconsciously, sensing something primal and unmistakable, power that didn't need permission to exist. Pam, he said, voice low but echoing like thunder in a canyon, you came here thinking you could shame me, because that's the only weapon you understand. But shame only destroys the guilty. And I am not guilty. Pam's lips parted, ready to push another rehearsed talking point, but he cut her off, not with volume, but with presence. You wanted to expose me, he continued, but all you exposed was how terrified you are of a world you can't control anymore. Reporters leaned in. Microphones surged forward like arrows. The moment was no longer a political exchange, it was history crystallizing. Traoré raised his hand slightly, and the room fell silent. You speak of order, he said, but your order means silence for others and power for yourselves. You speak of law, but your laws break nations. And you speak of freedom while putting chains on anyone who refuses to kneel. Pam swallowed hard. Her eyes darted to the cameras she now desperately wished were off. Traoré lifted his chin. You tried to shame Africa, but Africa does not kneel. Africa does not hide. Africa does not break. Then he delivered the final blow, the sentence that would ricochet across the internet, across continents, across generations. You exposed nothing, Pam. I exposed the fear you tried to bury inside your own voice. And that fear is why people like you will fall, and people like mine will rise. The room erupted. Journalists shouting questions, cameras firing like gunshots, aides scrambling. But Traoré didn't wait for the noise. He simply turned, walked out the door, and left Bondi standing alone in the wreckage of her attempted humiliation, now the one who had been utterly exposed.